Hello everyone, and welcome to another Iceberg video. This time around, I'll be talking about the Terminator Iceberg, so get ready to hear some weird lore, scrapped projects, weird behind-the-scenes trivia, crossovers, and more involving the Terminator franchise. If you end up liking the video, maybe think about leaving a like, or commenting below about your favorite entry. Maybe even subscribe if you want to see more Iceberg videos. I've got plenty more planned, and have already made a ton of icebergs, like ones based on Marvel, DC, Star Wars, Alien and Predator, Jurassic Park, Mass Effect, Godzilla, Evangelion, etc. Also, I have already talked about a few Terminator topics in these videos, so if you want to see me talk about them, go check out these videos. With all that being said, let's begin. The Terminator literally came to James Cameron in a dream. The Terminator franchise would have never happened if James Cameron didn't think of it. So how exactly did he come up with it? Well, according to Cameron, he thought of the film in 1981 while on a trip in Rome. He was extremely sick at the time, and while trying to sleep, had a vivid nightmare of a chrome skeleton emerging from a fire. This scared him so much that he woke up and sketched a drawing based on the skeleton from the dream. Over the next few years, he would draw the chrome skeleton over and over again while thinking up the idea of the first Terminator film's plot. And when the film was finally made, Cameron pretty much shot for shot recreated his dream. It's pretty wild to think that if James Cameron didn't have that nightmare, the Terminator franchise may never have happened. Cancelled Genesis trilogy. Terminator Genesis was meant to be the beginning of a brand new Terminator trilogy that would ignore the events of, well, pretty much every Terminator film released before it. Prior to the release of Genesis, Paramount announced that Genesis 2 would be released in May 2017, and Genesis 3 would be released in June of 2018. They were to be filmed back-to-back, and would be written by the writers of the first film. The first Genesis film, not the first Terminator film. Everything was looking great, but then Genesis came out, and didn't exactly do very well. It is the second highest grossing Terminator film, but on a budget of $158 million, it only made $440.6 million, only barely breaking even, and the critical response was extremely negative. And less than a year after Genesis's release, it was announced that the sequels were cancelled. So what were these sequels going to be about? Well, for starters, we know that Genesis 2 would have focused on John Connor, and how he adapts to the world now that he's the T-3000. Genesis 2 would have also begun with a flashback, or I guess flash forward, time travel's confusing, of John being captured by Skynet, and we would have seen more of the process of how he was turned into the T-3000. We also know that Daniel Dyson and Detective O'Brien would have played major roles in the film's sequels. The last thing we know about the Genesis sequels is that it would have answered the question, who sent Pops back in time? Because the Terminator Genesis sequels were cancelled, we never actually got an answer to one of the film's biggest mysteries. Who sent Pops back in time to 1973 to protect Sarah Connor? The only clue that we're given in the film is that whoever sent him back erased all of Pops' files on them in order to hide their identity from Skynet. This isn't really much evidence, so all we're left to do is just speculate. There's three main theories. The first is that Skynet themselves sent Pops back in time. The theory states that Skynet did this in order to break the time loop that resulted in them losing the war. The second theory is that Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor themselves sent Pops back in time to save Sarah, with the idea being that they find a freshly created Pops and send him back in time in the future. This theory doesn't really make all that much sense though, in my opinion, because that would mean that Kyle would remember the events of Genesis prior to the film beginning, and the final theory is not actually a theory. According to the board game Terminator Genesis: Rise of the Resistance, Pops was sent back in time by John Connor prior to becoming the T-3000. It's unknown if this was the actual plan that the sequels were going to do, but it's the closest we have to an answer. A vaguely canon board game. Call of Duty. In August of 2022, the T-800 and T-1000 were added to the game Call of Duty Vanguard as guest operators. Each being sold for about $20, they came with Terminator-themed weapon blueprints, along with Terminator-themed finishing moves and highlight intros. Both the T-800 and the T-1000's designs were taken from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Also, both characters had their own skins, with the T-800 getting various skins that showcased his skeletal robotic face. In fact, if you shot off the T-800's arms in the game, you could actually see part of its robotic limbs, and if you damage but don't kill the T-1000, he'll heal himself like he does in the film. Both characters were voiced via archive audio from Judgment Day, although the T-1000 also had various audio lines taken from other operators in Vanguard as a reference to his voice mimicking abilities. Then, in February of 2025, the T-800 returned to the Call of Duty series in Black Ops 6. This time, having his skin based on his appearance from the very first Terminator film. He also comes with various Terminator-themed weapon blueprints and cosmetics. This was released alongside a Terminator event in the game that gave players Terminator cosmetics and other gameplay features by collecting Terminator skulls in multiplayer matches. The O.J. Simpson rumor. For a long time, there were rumors that O.J. Simpson was set to play the Terminator in the first Terminator film, but for whatever reason, left the project or was fired. This rumor got so out of hand that Arnold Schwarzenegger himself even believed it at one point, claiming that O.J. backed out of the role last minute. However, this rumor isn't true, but there is a bit of truth to it. During a meeting with James Cameron, Mike Medavoy, co-founder of Orion Pictures, shot down Cameron's picks for the actor to play the Terminator. After this, he began to suggest actors, and one of these actors was O.J. Simpson. James Cameron hated this idea and instantly shot it down, saying that it was the stupidest thing that he had ever heard. So, no, while a very funny rumor, O.J. Simpson was never actually considered for the role. Are all of the films canon to each other? The Terminator film series is infamous for its messy timeline, although, to be honest with you, I don't actually think it's that messy. It's actually pretty simple. The first 4 films are in one canon, Genesis is a reboot, and Dark Fate is an alternate timeline that follows the first 2 films. I feel like the reason why so many people think that the series is so messy is because people really like to try and figure out ways for all of the films to be set in the same continuity as each other, which technically can be done, but it's not official, meaning that the studios behind the films don't actually consider all the films canon to each other. The main theory as to how all of the films are canon to each other is through time loops. The idea being that Salvation is the first film chronologically, then they send a Terminator back in time, which creates the original film, which leads into the Sarah Connor Chronicles. This is the first time loop. Sometime after the Sarah Connor Chronicles, the loop begins again, but this time some things are different. In this new timeline, the events of Terminator 1 through 4 happen. This leads into another timeline, as Skynet changes its plans and the events of Genesis happen. Eventually, Judgment Day occurs in this timeline, the event, not the film, which leads into a new timeline where the events of Terminator 1, 2, and Dark Fate happen, and as of right now, that's where the series ends. Keep in mind though, this is just a fan theory, none of this is confirmed, nor will it ever be. Metal Gear. The Metal Gear franchise doesn't really have many connections to the Terminator series, except for one massive connection. The very first game in the series, Metal Gear, released in July of 1987, had some very interesting box art. This drawing is meant to be Solid Snake. However, Terminator fans quickly realized that the drawing of Solid Snake was based on a promotional image of Kyle Reese for the original Terminator film. This wasn't actually the only Terminator reference from Metal Gear. In the game, you face off against robots called the TX-11, aka the Bloody Brad. These robots were designed after the T-800 from the Terminator series. In fact, Bloody Brad's name in the original release of the game was Arnold. Christian Bale freakout. During the filming of Terminator Salvation, Christian Bale had a bit of an incident. During filming, the film's director of photography, Shane Hurlbut, messed up and distracted Bale. Bale explained what he did wrong, and when it was time to shoot the scene again, Hurlbut accidentally distracted Bale again. The two talked again, and when it was time to film again, Hurlbut accidentally distracted Bale again, which led to him freaking out on the guy, insulting him, threatening to quit production, threatening to beat him up, and even threatening to destroy the production's lights. This incident may never have been revealed to the public, if not for audio of Bale's rant being leaked online in February of 2009. Bale was heavily criticized by the public, but was actually defended by many different actors and directors. They defended him because while they agreed he shouldn't have, freaked out, actors are under a ton of pressure, and Hurlbut shouldn't have kept making mistakes. Bale would release a public apology a few days after the audio was leaked, and said that after this outburst, he made amends with Hurlbut, and was just mad about the take being ruined. This outburst being leaked led to Bale being asked about it for years after. Although, nowadays, it doesn't really seem like many people care about it. Which, makes sense, this was over 15 years ago. Deleted scenes. Not every scene filmed for a movie ends up in the final product. Sometimes the scene isn't even filmed at all, and abandoned during the writing stage of development. Here's a list of some of the deleted scenes from the Terminator series. For Terminator 1, there was supposed to be a scene where Sarah Connor is put in an ambulance at the end of the film, and then it would be revealed that the CPU of the destroyed Terminator was brought to Cyberdyne Systems. There was also supposed to be a scene in which Kyle Reese gets tickled after banging Sarah. An entire subplot involving Lieutenant Traxler and Sergeant Vukovich investigating Sarah's disappearance was cut from the film. This subplot would have led to the pair dying and Traxler giving Kyle his handgun to protect Sarah. Finally, there was also supposed to be a scene in which Sarah and Kyle would have a bit of a scuffle after she declares that she wants to destroy Cyberdyne in order to prevent the creation of Skynet. For Terminator 2 Judgment Day, a whole bunch of scenes showing the future war were cut. Some of these scenes include soldiers taking plasma rifles from the destroyed Terminators and a human resistance technical battling Terminators. There were also supposed to be more scenes of the T-1000 looking for John, including scenes of him in John's room and stealing a police car. Speaking of the T-1000, after reforming after being frozen, the T-1000 was supposed to glitch and malfunction. There was supposed to be a scene in which Miles Dyson destroys the Cyberdyne neural net processor with an axe. Most famously, there was supposed to be a scene in which Sarah had a nightmare where she would meet back up with Kyle Reese. And finally, there was supposed to be an epilogue scene showing that Judgment Day had been prevented, with an elderly Sarah Connor watching an adult John Connor and his daughter playing at a park. Most of these deleted scenes were added back into the film via the special edition and the ultimate editions of Judgment Day. For Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, the fight between the T-850 and the TX at the Cyber Research Systems was supposed to be longer. A bunch of TX kills were cut from the film, including scenes where she kills Scott Mason and Elizabeth Anderson. The T1 unit rampage was also supposed to be longer. Most famously, there was supposed to be a scene where it would be revealed that the T-800 and T-850 were modeled off of a person named Sergeant Candy. Another scene would have shown Robert Brewster mistaking the T-850 for Sergeant Candy. And finally, a flash forward showing the future war at the end of the film was cut. For Terminator Salvation, a shot of Judgment Day was cut from the film. There was supposed to be a scene in which Virginia attempts to save Star from the T-600 with a stick. A cameo appearance from Terry Crews as a Resistance soldier was cut. He would be killed shortly after showing up. During the prison break, we were originally supposed to see various prisoners destroying T-600s and T-1 units. The scene of Marcus sneaking into Skynet Central was supposed to be longer, and included a scene where Marcus had to hide from a T-600. There was also supposed to be a scene in the film in which Blair Williams would go topless in the rain, and finally, a scene in the Resistance submarine where John is held by gunpoint by Ashdown was cut from the film. A lot of these scenes were added back into the film via the film's director's cut. For Terminator Genisys, a shot of Judgment Day from space was cut. There was also a bunch of future war scenes that were cut, including scenes of soldiers firing rockets at Terminators and helicopters battling Terminators. There was also a shot of Kyle grabbing guns in the bunker by the Golden Gate Bridge that was cut from the film. John and Kyle's talk before Kyle is sent back in time was supposed to be longer. And finally, the scene where the T-3000 confronts John, Kyle, and Pops in the hospital parking lot was supposed to be longer. And finally, for Terminator Dark Fate, the Future War flashback, or flash forward, was supposed to be much longer. It included scenes like Grace in a makeshift hospital where she volunteers for the augmentation process, an explanation for Grace's tattoo, and Danny and Grace talking about sending Grace back to the past. There was also supposed to be a scene where it would be revealed that Carl built an iPhone app that could detect when people time travel. There was also supposed to be a scene in which Danny would cry in a motel room over the deaths of her brother and father. This scene was cut due to test audiences believing that she cried too much, which is a really weird critique. The John Connor prologue scene was actually supposed to be longer. The character William Hadrell was also supposed to have a much bigger role in the film, but most of his scenes were cut. And finally, the Rev 9 was originally supposed to use an internet cafe to track Sarah and crew. Fortnite. In January of 2021, the T-800 and Sarah Connor were added to the game Fortnite, with Sarah's design being taken from Judgment Day. The two also came with Terminator-themed cosmetics, like a Skynet backpack and a T-800 arm that you could wear on your back. This wouldn't be the last time the Terminator series would cross over into Fortnite. In July 2023, the T-800 from Judgment Day, called the Terminator, was added to the game along with new Terminator-themed cosmetics, like a pickaxe based on the T-1000's arm blades, and a mini HK aerial drone as a glider. As of right now, these are the only Terminator characters in the game. But now, you can make the Terminator whippin' Nene with Hela, Paul Atreides, Chris Redfield, Spider-Man 2099, Megatron, Leela, Chewbacca, Agony, Eminem, Kakashi Hatake, Satoru Gojo, and Bianca Belair. How are dogs able to detect Terminators? In the Terminator series, it's common for Resistance soldiers to use dogs in order to sniff out Terminators because they can actually sense them, but it's never really been explained as to how dogs can do this. They just do. It's been speculated that they're able to sense if a person is a Terminator by their smell and sound. For starters, a Terminator is a machine wearing skin, so they probably smell different to dogs. And if something looks like a human but doesn't smell like one, that's gonna confuse a dog. And because they're machines, they probably make some kind of sound that humans can't hear. This theory is seemingly confirmed in the novel Terminator Hunt, where it's revealed that the hydraulics in TX units make sounds on a frequency that only dogs can hear. I just realized, the fact that Carl has a dog in Dark Fate means that the dog thinks of him as a human, which plays into the whole "can a machine become a human" thing going on in that film. Huh. That's pretty neat. Terminator Sector War. Terminator Sector War is a 4-issue miniseries written by Brian Wood and released from August 2018 to May of 2019. This comic reveals that the T-800 sent back in time to 1984, featured in the original Terminator film, was not the only Terminator sent back to 1984. While the Arnold T-800 was hunting down Sarah Connor in California, across the United States in New York City, another T-800 unit was sent back in time to kill NYPD officer Lucy Castro and her abusive boyfriend Will. This was because the two of them were going to be the parents to a high-ranking member of the human resistance during the future war. The Terminator is successful at killing Will, but Lucy is able to escape and discovers that she's pregnant. In order to combat the Terminator, she joins forces with a local arms dealer and his gang in exchange for her wiping all evidence the NYPD had on them. The Terminator takes out the gang fairly easily, but Lucy was able to stop the machine by driving a bulldozer into it, sending it into a river where it sank to the bottom. With the Terminator destroyed, Lucy travels to the West Coast to find Sarah Connor, as she saw the events of the first film on the news. Keep in mind, though, while this confirms that another Terminator was sent back in time to 1984 as the same time as the Arnold T-800, this is a comic, and in the Terminator series, unless it's in a film or maybe a show, it's probably not canon, like it's in its own micro-continuity. James Cameron cameos. It's not uncommon for a film director to cameo in their own film, but it is uncommon for a director to cameo in their own film 3 times as 2 different characters. James Cameron did this in the original Terminator film. His first cameo was voicing Stan Morsky, the man that Sarah was originally going to go on a date with. While he doesn't appear in the film, his voice can be heard on Sarah's answering machine. The second and third cameos are of the same character, an unnamed motel manager who is only ever heard talking with Sarah and later talking with the T-800 on the phone. Cancelled Dark Fate trilogy. Just like Terminator Genisys, Dark Fate was meant to be the beginning of a brand new Terminator trilogy. But unlike Genisys, Paramount didn't set any release dates for the sequels, though James Cameron did state that he believed the second installment would be released sometime in 2022. Everything was looking good, until Dark Fate came out and bombed at the box office. This killed the plans for a trilogy, but what were these plans? We don't know all that much, but we do know that there were going to be talks about bringing Arnold back, despite the T-800s being wiped from existence and Carl dying. This was an idea from James Cameron, who said, quote, "Look, if we make a shit ton of money with this film, and the cards say that they like Arnold, I think Arnold can come back. I'm a writer, I can think of scenarios. We don't have a plan for that right now, let me put it that way. I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of goodwill for that character in the audience." As for other returning actors and characters, while Danny was planned to show up in future films, Sarah Connor was a bit different, as Linda Hamilton stated that she didn't really want to do another film because of the amount of physical training she had to go through to make Dark Fate. Though she did say that she would come back if the next film was smaller in scale and budget. And that's pretty much all we know. There are rumors that the sequel would have had a new Terminator that looked like Grace as the main antagonist, and Arnold would have appeared as Sergeant Candy, who is now the head of the Legion program, and it would have been revealed that Sarah accidentally created Legion, and Legion later creates Skynet. But these are only rumors that have very little, if any, backing, and have never been confirmed. Last Action Hero. In the film Last Action Hero, an action comedy film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and released in June of 1993, there's 2 major Terminator Easter eggs. The first one is rather obvious. In the film, an alternate universe version of Terminator 2 Judgment Day is shown, where Sylvester Stallone played the Terminator instead of Arnold, a reference to how Stallone was considered for the role, and also as a reference to Arnold's rivalry with Stallone. The second Easter egg is the fact that the T-1000 appears in the film, with Robert Patrick reprising the role. Filming Terminator was illegal. When the first Terminator film was being made, it was being made with a low budget, and James Cameron wasn't exactly the biggest name in Hollywood at the time, so the film crew weren't actually able to get filming permits for every place that they filmed. This led to the crew shooting scenes without these permits, which meant that they could be charged with a pretty hefty fine by police. This actually almost happened. The final scene of the film was actually one of these scenes, and when the police showed up, James Cameron had to quickly lie and come up with a story as to why they were out there. He claimed that he was a student at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, and that they were filming a student film. The cop that showed up told them to drag their camera rig off the highway they were filming on, and then left. The original Terminator Salvation. Originally, Terminator Salvation was going to be a very different film. The original film would have had Marcus rescuing Kyle and Star from a group of cannibals in the opening act. Marcus was also going to talk a lot more and have a lot more emotion. Despite this, he would be even more of a machine in this version of the film, as he was apparently just a Terminator with a human brain. He was the first of a new human-machine hybrid species that was running Skynet, and using Skynet to create more of them. This was called Project Angel. John Connor was also not going to be in the film until the final act, where he would be killed by Serena Kogan, and Serena would have also been a human-machine hybrid as well. This might have been the film we got, if not for Christian Bale, who was pretty annoyed with the script, because John Connor wasn't a main character, so the script was rewritten to feature him as a main character. Although, this film's ending also killed off John Connor, with the human resistance then skinning John's body and putting that skin on Marcus so that he could become the new John Connor. It would be revealed here that the scar featured in Judgment Day's flash-forward scenes was actually a result of this skin transfer process, and also retcons John Connor out of that scene, putting Marcus there in his place. Oh, and it gets worse. Marcus would then wake up post-surgery, now evil, and would kill everyone. Kate, Star, Kyle Reese, Barnes, the entire human resistance, everyone. This script was actually leaked in 2008, which caused a massive backlash from the fanbase, so the plot was rewritten into the film we ended up getting. Mortal Kombat. In October 2019, the Terminator was added to Mortal Kombat 11 as a guest fighter. Taking his appearance from Dark Fate, he may have looked like Arnold, but he wasn't voiced by him, instead being voiced by Chris Cox. Although, it wasn't just the Dark Fate design that was in the game. There were two other skins that made the T-800 look like the Terminator from Judgment Day and Rise of the Machines. The Terminator features a variety of references to the franchise through his moveset and dialogue. For example, in one of his fatalities, he sends the opponent into the future war where they're gunned down by an army of T-800s. There's also the fact that sometimes, when beginning the match, he states that the opponent is targeted for termination. When asked by who, he'll either say Skynet or Legion. As for his arcade ending, he takes the Hourglass time machine and uses it to try and destroy humanity. However, no matter how many times he travels back in time, the outcome is always the same. Humanity and the machines destroy each other. Realizing that war is lame, he uses the Hourglass to create a new timeline where humanity and machines live in harmony, and in order to prevent anyone from learning about the horrific war between humanity and Skynet and the Hourglass itself, the Terminator destroys itself to destroy all knowledge of them. This wouldn't be the last crossover between the two IPs, as not only was the Terminator later added to the game Mortal Kombat to mobile, but in March of 2025, the T-1000 was added to the game Mortal Kombat 1 as a guest fighter. This time, he actually has his original actor voicing him, Robert Patrick. But like the Terminator before him, his moves make various references to the Terminator franchise, namely Judgment Day and Genesis, the two films he's in.
Terminator's back to fight evil with his mobile assault vehicle.
I've got to find Evil T-1000.
Disguised as a policeman, Evil T-1000 aims to destroy.
I've got you now.
Who's got who?
Time to get serious.
New mobile assault will blow you away.
The party's over, T-1000. Adios, amigo.
Terminator.
I'll be back.
T2 3D Battle Across Time. T2 3D Battle Across Time was a stunt show attraction at Universal Studios Florida, Universal Studios Hollywood, and Universal Studios Japan. Sadly, you can't experience it anymore, as it was shut down in Florida in October of 2017, Hollywood in January of 2013, and Japan in September of 2020. The attraction is notable for not only being a Terminator-themed stunt show, but also a sequel to Judgment Day. Yes, this theme park attraction was a sequel to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Not only that, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Robert Patrick, and Edward Furlong all returned and reprised their roles as the T-800, Sarah Connor, the T-1000, and John Connor. James Cameron even returned to film and direct it, which might have you a little bit confused, because how can all of these actors take parts in the stunt show, and how can it be filmed? Well, it's because T2 3D is a combination between a stunt show and a 3D film. The film portion was directed by Cameron and had all of the returning actors, while the stunt show portion of the attraction had the characters played by theme park workers. The story behind the attraction is that Skynet sends another T-1000 after John Connor, so the Resistance sends another T-800 to protect John, but this time, instead of protecting him in the present, he brings John to the future war. So the T-800 and John travel through the future war, battling Terminators, until the Terminator eventually sends John back to the present, while he sacrifices his life to destroy Skynet in the future. The attraction also introduces two new Terminator models into the Terminator canon. The first is the T-70, which is the direct predecessor to the T-800, sometimes, and most famously, the T-1 The T-1 million, aka the T-Meg, is a giant spider crab Terminator made of the same material as the T-1000. Because of this, it can morph its legs into various weapons, although it can't actually morph into people, as if you remember in Terminator 2, it's mentioned that the T-1000 can only turn into people roughly the same height as it. And seeing as there's no giant spider crabs fighting Skynet, it can't disguise itself as anything. It's an insanely dangerous Terminator model, but it didn't see much use. Only a handful of these were ever created, and usually served as guardians of important Skynet bases, basically being a weapon of last resort. While you might think that the T-1 million would be exclusive to this attraction, the T-1 million has actually appeared in other material, such as RPG sourcebooks and comics. So it seems that the T-1 million is a canon Terminator model. Cancelled Legion Future War film. While Dark Fate was planned to be a trilogy of films, the film following Dark Fate wasn't going to be part of this trilogy, and instead was going to be a spin-off film set during the Future War in the Dark Fate timeline, so it would have been about the Resistance battling Legion instead of Skynet. Grace would have appeared in this film, which may make you think that this was going to be a prequel to Dark Fate, but no, actually. This was going to be a Grace from a different timeline, which means that this film would have been set in a different Legion Future War, unconnected with the Dark Fate trilogy. Obviously, this film was cancelled when the Dark Fate sequels were canned. At least, I think. To be honest with you, I'm not sure if this is actually true. I was originally going to include all of this information in the Dark Fate trilogy plans entry, but these plans don't line up with all of the other information that we have about the cancelled sequels. This information was revealed by Mackenzie Davis, who played Grace in the film, during an interview in December of 2020, and she refers to this film as a follow-up to Dark Fate. But how would this film be a follow-up? Dark Fate ends with Danny vowing to prevent Judgment Day. I guess maybe this could have been like an alternate future created by Danny trying to prevent Judgment Day, but I can't see them just skipping over that part of the story. I don't know. Was there going to be a Legion Future War spin-off film? Was this actually just gonna be Dark Fate 2? I don't really know. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe the answer's really obvious and I'm being stupid. Original casting. Just like every other film ever made, some actors just don't make the cut when they audition for roles in the Terminator series. That, or they declined a role offered to them. Here's a list of some actors who either auditioned for roles, were offered roles, or were considered for roles, but for whatever reason, didn't end up getting the part. For the T-800, Harrison Ford, Randy Quaid, Sylvester Stallone, Michael Douglas, Kevin Kline, and Jürgen Prochnow were considered for the role. For Sarah Connor, Sharon Stone, Sigourney Weaver, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michelle Pfeiffer, Meg Ryan, Madonna, Daryl Hannah, Deborah Winger, Terry Garr, Kate Capshaw, and Jodie Foster were considered for the role. For Kyle Reese, Mel Gibson, Christopher Reeve, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tommy Lee Jones, Bruce Willis, Kurt Russell, Bruce Springsteen, Matt Dillon, and Sting were considered for the role. For the T-1000, Blackie Lawless and Billy Idol were considered for the role. For Miles Dyson, Denzel Washington was considered for the role. For Sarah Connor in Terminator Genisys, Emily Blunt, Margot Robbie, Brie Larson, and Naomi Watts were considered for the role. For Kyle Reese in Terminator Genisys, Taylor Kitsch, Boyd Holbrook, Nicholas Hoult, and Wilson Bethel were considered for the role. For John Connor in Rise of the Machines, Shane West, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Logan Marshall Green were considered for the role. For Kate Brewster in Rise of the Machines, Sophia Bush was considered for the role. For the TX, Gwyneth Paltrow, Chyna, Peta Wilson, and Carrie Ann Moss were considered for the role. For Marcus Wright, Josh Brolin, and Daniel Day-Lewis were considered for the role. For Lieutenant Traxler, Edward James Olmos was considered for the role. And finally, for Serena Kogan, Tilda Swinton was considered for the role. Cancelled Salvation Trilogy. Like Genisys and Dark Fate, Terminator Salvation was supposed to be the beginning of a trilogy. I think the Terminator series might be the only film series to have 3 back-to-back cancelled trilogies. A trilogy of cancelled trilogies. Anyways, unlike Genisys and Dark Fate, the Salvation trilogy wasn't cancelled due to the film underperforming or a negative reception. Instead, it was legal troubles. The film's production company, the Halcyon Company, filed for bankruptcy in August of 2009. This was because they were in the middle of a lawsuit with the company's financer, the hedge fund Pacificor, over payment issues. Turns out that Pacificor had given the Halcyon Company $30 million in 2007 to buy the rights to the Terminator series, but it seems that the Halcyon Company had a problem with paying the hedge fund back. Pacificor would win the lawsuit, and Halcyon had to sell the Terminator rights to another studio, killing the Salvation trilogy. So what would these Salvation sequels be about? Well, if you were hoping for an entire trilogy of future war films, prepare to be disappointed. The sequel would have been about John Connor traveling back in time to 2011, right before Judgment Day, tying this film into the Sarah Connor Chronicles, where he would have to convince the world's superpowers to join forces to prepare for a Skynet invasion. No, not Judgment Day. Skynet figured out a way to send entire Terminator armies back in time, so it would have been about John and the modern world fighting off a Terminator invasion from the future. And in 2011, John would meet a man played by Robert Patrick, who was going to be revealed to be the human template for the T-1000. And that's all we know about this cancelled trilogy. Kyle Reese didn't die in the Terminator. So you might remember Kyle Reese dying in the final act of the original Terminator. Well, you're remembering that wrong, because he doesn't actually die. Except he does. But in the comic The Terminator, 1984, written by Zack Whedon and releasing from September of 2010 to November of the same year, he doesn't. In fact, in this timeline, Kyle wasn't even the only Resistance soldier sent back in time. Turns out, another soldier named Ben was also sent back, but he didn't get to Kyle in time, and only found him after he supposedly died. But before he could do anything, he saw government agents taking his body away, because they figured out that Kyle was from the future, so they held him prisoner in a military base. Kyle sits in this military base for months, while Ben looks for Sarah. After 4 months, he finally finds her, and the two work together to rescue Kyle. They're successful, but while escaping, they're attacked by a Terminator who was sent back in time after Skynet realized that their first Terminator failed. They're able to defeat it by pushing it into some cement that's going to be used to build a dam. After escaping, the three of them live together at Sarah's ranch, in hiding. Months go by, and Sarah is about to go into labor, but just as that's happening, the Terminator shows up at the ranch. Kyle battles and destroys the Terminator, while Ben helps Sarah give birth. Although, during the fight, Kyle is fatally injured. Luckily, before he dies, he's able to meet his son, John. Again? It's gotta be weird to be introduced to your son when he's an adult, and then go back in time and see his birth. Anyways, after Kyle dies, Sarah and Ben work together to train John to prepare for Judgment Day. The original version of Terminator 1. James Cameron's original plan for the first Terminator film was similar to the final film we ended up getting, but there are some pretty notable differences between his original plan and the film we ended up getting. For example, Sarah Connor would have had an old injury in the film. When she was younger, she got injured while ice skating. This injury would be healed with surgical pins. And because Skynet knew of this injury, the Terminator would have orders to cut open the legs of anybody named Sarah Connor in order to locate these surgical pins, which would confirm her identity. Elements of this surgical pin plot point were included in the film's novelization. Probably the biggest change to the film was that Cameron's original draft included a second time-traveling resistance soldier named Summer, although he doesn't really do anything in the film, as he's killed almost immediately when he arrives in 1984. Other details about this version of the film include the Terminator having to eat in order to keep its skin from rotting, and we would have actually seen Stan Morsky and see him failing at seducing Sarah. Terminator Dark Fate Defiance was supposed to be a movie tie-in theory. Terminator Dark Fate Defiance is an RTS game that takes place in the future war in the Legion timeline, aka the Dark Fate timeline. Developed by Slytherin Software, the game was presumably meant to ride off of the success of Terminator Dark Fate and its sequels, with it beginning development sometime in 2021, with a release window of 2022. However, the game would get delayed and wouldn't be released until February of 2024, almost 5 years after the film it takes its name from. The game itself isn't really Iceberg entry worthy, but the speculation around the game is. A lot of people believe that the game was planned to be released sometime in either 2019 or 2020, and that the game just kept getting pushed back in the developer's schedule. Though there's not really a ton of evidence for this theory, outside of the fact that the game has Dark Fate in its title. Besides the game switching developers in 2022, not much about the game's development is online, so all we can really do is speculate. Personally, I don't think that this game was actually meant to be a tie-in with Dark Fate. I think the reason why the game has Dark Fate in its title is simply just because it takes place in that film's timeline. WWE 2K16. In order to promote the release of Terminator Genisys, the T-800s from the first two Terminator films were added to the wrestling game WWE 2K16 via a pre-order bonus. Although, technically, they're not actually the T-800s. This is actually just Arnold Schwarzenegger taking part in WWE and playing the character of the T-800. The T-800 units in the game are even named Arnold T-1 and Arnold T-2, so it's obvious they're not actually Terminators. Although, Arnold T-1 does literally spawn in via the time machine bubble, so maybe Arnold actually is a Terminator, I don't know. As for references to the franchise, as mentioned before, Arnold T-1 shows up via the time bubble, while Arnold T-2 shows up on the motorcycle from Judgment Day, and I'm pretty sure that's all of the references. Unfortunately, I don't think you can get this DLC anymore. There was also another crossover between the two franchises. In order to promote both the crossover DLC and Terminator Genisys, wrestler Triple H made a very unique Terminator-themed entrance at WrestleMania 31. Triple H was probably chosen for this because Arnold had actually beaten him up once during an earlier WWE event. A video of Arnold endorsing Triple H was even showed off, where he also declares that WrestleMania 31 was Judgment Day. Terminator One-Shot. So we all know that in the Terminator series, you can't be sent back in time with anything, which is why everyone is sent back in time naked, though Terminators can bring back weapons as long as they're parts of their body, like they are in Terminator 3 and Terminator 0, but there is a comic that answers the hypothetical question of what if a future weapon got sent back in time. The Terminator one-shot, released in July of 1991 and written by James Robinson, features the character Ellis Ruggles. He's a resistance soldier who was sent back in time to watch over Sarah Connor. He was actually sent back to 1955, so he's been watching Sarah in secret for decades. And it's a good thing that he was around, because he discovers that Skynet sent another T-800 back in time to 1984 to kill Sarah Connor. When Ellis discovers this Terminator's existence, he goes after it and finds it attacking a Sarah Connor. Not the actual Sarah Connor, but a different woman named Sarah Connor. And he's unable to save Sarah Connor from being killed. Yeah, he fails to save her and dies in the process. But he does severely damage the Terminator, which eventually leads to its destruction. Don't worry though, this Sarah Connor was trying to murder her husband, so she wasn't exactly a great person. Now, Ellis battled this Terminator using an electro-mech phaser, a makeshift weapon he created out of future weapon technology he smuggled into the past. How was he able to do this? Well, it's implied that he shoved the weapon tech up his ass. He also had a pet monkey named Peanut, so that's pretty funny. James Cameron's Terminator 3. Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines is one of the many examples of films that were in development hell. The film began development sometime in the early to mid-1990s. James Cameron was originally against making a third film, but after working on T2 3D, he changed his mind and he began to write a script for a third film. But there was a bit of a problem. The company that produced Terminator 2 and currently had the film rights went bankrupt in November of 1995, which meant that they had to sell the Terminator rights to another studio. Cameron wanted 20th Century Fox to purchase the rights, and luckily for him, Fox did try to get the rights, but would eventually give up on the effort due to the film Titanic, which Cameron directed, having a troubled production. And after this, Cameron lost all interest in writing and directing Terminator 3, despite Arnold trying to convince him to return. Eventually, the company Intermedia got the rights to the franchise, and a third film was released in July of 2003. So what was James Cameron's Terminator 3 going to be about? For starters, we know that he intended for the T-800 and Sarah Connor to return, as he had asked both Linda Hamilton and Arnold to return, and that's it. No, really, that's all the information we have about this version of Terminator 3. T2 novel series. Written by S.M. Sterling, the T2 novel trilogy is exactly what it sounds like. It's a novel trilogy that continues the story of Judgment Day. The story follows John and Sarah Connor 6 years after Judgment Day, and they're living a pretty chill life, as they believe that Judgment Day has been prevented. This peace is eventually broken when a T-800 Terminator attacks them. Yup, Judgment Day hasn't been prevented. Turns out that Cyberdyne had a backup facility in Montana, so Skynet is still created. In order to take down Skynet, John and Sarah team up with Miles Dyson's FBI brother, Jordan, John's girlfriend, Wendy, and a former Austrian counterterrorism operator named Dieter. In this timeline, Dieter is actually the template for the T-800 series instead of Sergeant Candy. The team works together to destroy the second Cyberdyne facility while also battling the I-950 Infiltrator, a new Terminator who goes by the name of Serena Burns. The I-950 Terminators are a pretty weird model of Terminator, because they're not actually machines. They're people with cybernetic implants put into their brain to make them obedient to Skynet. But what's crazy is that these Terminators are literally created from babies. Skynet creates test tube babies, and when they're born, they attach the implants to them. Despite being people and not machines, they still have enhanced strength due to training from birth. They also have infrared vision, they can reproduce sexually, and can stimulate their brain to give themselves 8 hours of sleep in just 1 hour. They're pretty nuts. Sadly, John and crew are unable to stop Skynet's creation, and Judgment Day occurs. The final book in the series takes place in the Future War, and we see John sending Kyle Reese and the T-800 back in time to save himself and his mom. They're also able to destroy Skynet in the future, and Sarah marries Dieter. Releasing from April of 2001 to May of 2004, this series of novels is probably the most well-known Terminator novel series. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, in this timeline, Skynet's creator is a Neo-Axis Powers member, and John gets that iconic Judgment Day scar from a cyborg leopard seal being controlled by an I-950 infiltrator named Clea Bennett. Yeah, in order to protect a Cyberdyne facility in Antarctica, Cyberdyne created cyborg leopard seals to act as guard dogs, or guard seals. Terminator 3: War of the Machines. Released in November 2003, Terminator 3: War of the Machines is the first and only multiplayer exclusive Terminator game. Primarily taking place in the Future War, the game allows you to play as either the Resistance or Skynet, and battle other players online. While primarily an online game, there is a single-player mode that's similar to the Star Wars Battlefront Instant Action mode, where you play normal matches but with bots instead of players. Speaking of Battlefront, there's even hero-like units you can play as by gaining enough points, like the T-800. War of the Machines was not received well due to the game having very poor enemy AI, a bunch of bugs and glitches, and the fact that there weren't any official servers. The game played very similarly to Battlefield 1942, which came out a year earlier in 2002, which has led many people to call this game a ripoff, or a Battlefield 1942 clone. Overall, while the game, I think, has a small cult following, this attempt at a multiplayer-only Terminator game failed and was forgotten to time. Sarah Connor Chronicles Season 3. Running for 31 episodes over the course of 2 seasons, from January of 2008 to April of 2009, Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles was a show that followed John and Sarah Connor in the 2000s, trying to prevent Judgment Day. The show was well received and ended on a cliffhanger. This cliffhanger was meant to be continued in a 3rd season, but this never ended up happening due to viewership getting lower and lower by the episode, and the show being fairly expensive to produce at the time. Despite fan outcry for a 3rd season, or at the very least a comic or novel continuation, The Sarah Connor Chronicles remains incomplete. So what was this 3rd season going to be about? We know that this season would have taken place primarily in the Future War, following John getting sent there at the end of Season 2, and in the future, he would find Sarah Connor, who was able to survive Judgment Day. Jesse, Derek, and Riley would have all returned in some capacity, and Miles Dyson's son, Danny, would have been introduced as a main character. It would have also been revealed that Catherine Weaver was from a far more moderate sub-faction of Skynet, who didn't want to completely wipe out humanity, and wanted to figure out a way to avoid the future war, such as potentially making an alliance with humanity. John would have also found himself with multiple love interests, While he was still into Cameron, he would start to fall in love with Allison Young and even Savannah Weaver, who by this point is thankfully an adult. Finally, while the season would have heavily focused on the future war stuff, the present-day story with Sarah would still be around, it just wouldn't be the main focus. C890.L C890.L, aka Helmet Head, is a Terminator unit featured in the comic series Terminator Tempest, releasing from August of 1990 to November of the same year. C890 would also appear in Tempest's sequel comics, Secondary Objectives, releasing from July to October of 1991, and The Enemy Within, releasing from November of 1991 to February of 1992. He was part of a team of Terminators sent back to 1984 to protect Dr. Bertram Hollister, one of the people behind Skynet. Resistance soldiers had traveled back in time to kill him, so he needed protection. The two parties would clash, resulting in the deaths of all but one of the Resistance soldiers and the destruction of most of the Terminator squad. Dudley, a Resistance soldier who was forced to become a cyborg and work with the Terminators, would defect from Skynet and help destroy the Terminators, resulting in C890 being the only surviving Terminator. Despite this, he actually succeeded in his mission and even gave Bertram one of the destroyed Terminator's heads so that he could create Skynet faster. You would think by this point Bertram would realize what he was doing and stop working on Skynet, but he actually didn't care about the future. He knew that he was going to wipe out humanity, but was just like, I can make money right now, so whatever. Anyways, after protecting Bertram from the Resistance soldiers, C890 was confronted by another Terminator that got sent back in time. This Terminator gave him a new objective, to kill Sarah Connor, while this Terminator, Z000.M, protected Bertram. C890 battles the remaining Resistance soldiers while on his way to kill Sarah Connor, but is defeated and reprogrammed into working for the Resistance. C890 and Z000 battle each other, which results in Z000 being destroyed, while C890 is freed from the reprogramming. He's then repaired by some bikers. Instead of thanking the bikers, C890 slaughters the entire biker gang. After this little killing spree, he heads off to go take out Sarah Connor, but in the ensuing battle, he's finally destroyed by the Resistance. C890.L is mostly known for his very unique appearance. For the first two installments in the series, he's just a normal T-800, but after being repaired by the biker gang, C-890 was now covered in spikes and had two demonic-looking horns sticking out of its head. The New John Connor Chronicles. Releasing from 2002 to 2003 and written by Russell Blackford, Terminator 2: The New John Connor Chronicles is a novel trilogy that continues the story from Judgment Day. Despite being released around the same time and having somewhat similar premises, The New John Connor Chronicles and the T2 trilogy are completely separate and don't connect with each other at all. The New John Connor Chronicles follows two different timelines. The first is John's world. This is a continuation of Judgment Day, while Skynet's world follows a what-if scenario. In this timeline, the T-1000 realizes that Sarah and crew are gonna try to kill or stop Miles Dyson, so he confronts Dyson first and warns him about Sarah, sending Dyson to work in Colorado in a top-secret base. This results in the rest of the film not happening, and Judgment Day occurs in 1997. In this timeline, John, Sarah, and the T-800 all fight for the Resistance, but in 2012, Sarah and the T-800 are killed in battle. Eventually, John sends back the T-800 and Kyle, so the events of the first two films happen. But then he also sends Eve back in time. Eve is a T-799, yet another direct predecessor to the T-800. Eve is sent back in time to John's world, and in John's world, she helps John and Sarah prevent Skynet's creation. But it's not just them. Some genetically enhanced super soldiers from another timeline, known as Jade's world, have traveled to John's world to also prevent Skynet's creation. Jade's world is a timeline where John and Sarah died trying to prevent Judgment Day in 2007. By the end of the story, John, Sarah, and Eve from John's world, John and a group of reprogrammed T-1000 and T-800 Terminators from Skynet's world, and Jade, one of the enhanced soldiers from Jade's world, travel between all three timelines to destroy Skynet in all of them. As you can probably tell, the new John Connor Chronicles is an insane story. There's one more thing from this series that I want to mention, the TXA. This is a Terminator model that was basically a more advanced version of the Rev-9 from Dark Fate. Made of the same material as the T-1000, this Terminator model could become multiple people or even animals at once. It could also infect people by sending nanoware into a person's brain, which would turn them into a brainwashed slave. RoboCop versus the Terminator. Freddy has Jason, the alien has the Predator, and the Terminator has RoboCop. The two IPs have crossed over 4 different times over the years. The first was in RoboCop vs. the Terminator, releasing from September of 1992 to December of the same year, and written by Frank Miller. The story starts out in the future war, as a resistance soldier named Flo discovers that Skynet gained its self-awareness by interacting with RoboCop. So in order to prevent Skynet from gaining sentience, Flo travels back in time to Detroit, shortly after the events of RoboCop 3, in order to kill RoboCop. Skynet sends 3 Terminators back in time to protect RoboCop, though RoboCop doesn't really care for the Terminators' whole terminating thing, so he fights them instead of fighting Flo. RoboCop destroys the Terminators, but then realizes that his existence will lead to Skynet starting a nuclear war, so he decides to self-terminate. In order to keep him alive, some other Terminators hook up RoboCop's consciousness to Skynet. However, RoboCop's mind refuses to work with Skynet and tries to escape Skynet's systems. It takes decades for him to escape, but he does so and creates a new body for himself. It's now post-Judgment Day, and RoboCop creates a robotic clone army of himself to defeat Skynet. He's able to destroy Skynet, but in the battle, the Flo of this timeline dies. This inspires RoboCop to prevent all of this from happening in the first place by traveling back in time to destroy Skynet. After he destroys Skynet, the future is saved, and RoboCop fades from existence, while this new timeline's RoboCop continues his job protecting the streets of Detroit. The story ends with the reveal that Skynet actually sent one more T-800 unit back in time to save Skynet, but they overshot the time travel and ended up sending the T-800 to prehistoric times, where it gets destroyed by a T-Rex. This comic series was partially adapted into multiple games in 1993 and 1994. Years later, a second crossover would be released, called Terminator RoboCop Kill Human, releasing from July of 2011 to October of the same year, and written by Rob Williams. This comic is widely considered to be not just one of the worst RoboCop stories out there, but also one of the worst Terminator stories out there. The story begins with Skynet brainwashing RoboCop into killing the last person alive in the future war. Pretty upset by this, RoboCop travels back in time to the events of Terminator 2 and destroys the T-800 protecting John Connor. He then works with Sarah and John, and they team up with Dick Jones from the RoboCop franchise, who's a good guy in this universe, and has an army of Ed 209s. They then chill out in Jones's personal aircraft carrier, only for the T-1000 to show up and crash a plane into it. So the T-1000 is slaughtering everyone on board the aircraft carrier, so RoboCop steps in to fight him. Except he doesn't actually battle him, and instead traps the T-1000 in a room with John Connor, Dick Jones, and the T-800, who's starting to come back online again. The T-1000 then decapitates John, only for RoboCop to then fill the room with acid, destroying the T-1000 and the T-800, and killing Dick Jones. Then, the aircraft carrier sinks, and Sarah Connor and RoboCop drown. The most recent crossover between the two IPs was in Mortal Kombat 11, as not only was the Terminator a guest character, but also RoboCop. They even reference the previous crossovers in their intro conversations. The Outer Limits. While the original Terminator film is a classic, and most people like it, the film is somewhat controversial to some. In September of 1964, an episode of the anthology series The Outer Limits aired, called Soldier, which was an adaptation of the short story Soldier from Tomorrow. The story is about time-traveling soldiers from the far future who end up in 1964. They battle, and during this conflict, one of the soldiers saves a woman from being killed by the other soldier. The plot of the episode, and by extension the short story, is somewhat similar to the first Terminator film, the most similar element being the future war scenes. The man who wrote both the story and the episode, Harlan Ellison, thought the film was far too similar, and filed a lawsuit against Orion Pictures and the production company Hemdale for plagiarism. When the lawsuit came to an end, Ellison received $65,000 to $75,000, and the phrase "acknowledgement to the works of Harlan Ellison" was added to the film's credits. James Cameron was not a fan of this outcome, and to this day continues to deny copying anything from The Outer Limits or Soldier from Tomorrow, even calling Harlan Ellison a parasite who can kiss his ass.
Terminator Salvation. There's no salvation, just termination. Skynet and the Hunter Killer have the Resistance on the run. T-1s, T-600s, T-700s.
Marcus Wright's in trouble! We're outnumbered!
Resistance A-10 Warthog to the rescue with missile-firing action.
Fire! Come with me if you want to live.
Man versus Terminator, and the Terminators are winning.
I'll be back.
Terminator movie figures and vehicles, each sold separately.
The T-Infinity. The T-Infinity is one of the most powerful Terminator models ever created, appearing heavily in the comics Terminator Infinity and Terminator Revolution. Only a single T-Infinity unit was ever created. Skynet created it to destroy temporal anomalies in order to keep the timeline balanced in Skynet's favor. And in order to do this, the T-Infinity was created with a built-in time machine, meaning that it can teleport throughout time whenever it wants to, and can use this time machine to teleport attacks made against it. For example, if somebody were to shoot at the T-Infinity, it would teleport the bullets into another place in time before they could hit it. Although, this isn't actually as powerful as it sounds, as this system has a very big flaw. It's not automatic, meaning that the T-Infinity has to know the attack is coming in order to activate the ability. So if you were to snipe it from a mile away, the bullets would hit the T-Infinity. Luckily for the machine, like most other Terminators, bullets aren't exactly great against it, especially since the T-Infinity has a force field-like shield covering parts of its body, and if anything touches this force field, it's disintegrated. It's also got the ability to create various plasma guns, electricity guns, and a giant energy axe. Sounds pretty much indestructible, right? Well, it does have a few more weaknesses. If its head is removed, it's destroyed. It's also weak to EMPs and explosions. Thanks to these weaknesses, the T-Infinity was eventually destroyed during a three-way fight between it, John Connor, and the Dire Wolf. More on the Dire Wolf in just a little bit. Cancelled Genesis TV series. In 2013, it was announced that Annapurna Pictures and Skydance Productions were working on a 13-episode live-action Terminator series with Ashley Miller and Zach Stentz as the show's writers. The show would later be revealed to be connected to Terminator Genesis, and elements of the show would be incorporated or referenced in the sequels to Genesis. Though I'm not entirely sure how they would do that, because the two plot details that we know about the show contradict each other. It was originally revealed that it was supposed to be some sort of what-if scenario, where at a critical moment in the original films, something was to go wrong, but they already kinda did this in Genesis, and that was a full-on reboot. Then, Skydance Productions' chief creative officer, Dana Goldberg, hinted that the show might be about a young Sarah Connor being protected by Pops, basically being a prequel to Genesis. Once again, another cancelled Terminator project with conflicting information. But I guess this doesn't matter, because when the Genesis trilogy was cancelled, so was this show. Death Garden. In May 2019, a T-800 was added to the game Death Garden via DLC. And by added to the game, I mean it was added as a skin. Unfortunately, the Terminator wasn't a hunter in the game, but instead was a skin for the hunter, the Poacher. This DLC was actually supposed to be bigger, as you can find cut content in the game's files. And in these files, you can find models of Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese from the first Terminator film. They would have been skins for some of the game's scavengers. However, for whatever reason, possibly licensing issues, they were scrapped from the DLC and were never released. Terminator 3000. In August of 2010, it was announced that a 3D animated Terminator film was in development, titled Terminator 3000. The film would be a reboot and be produced by Hanover House with a budget of $70 million. Unfortunately, we don't know too much about this cancelled film, besides the fact that the studio wanted the film to be PG-13. We probably would have gotten more information about this film if development didn't last like a month. Yeah, the film was cancelled extremely quickly, not because of a lack of interest in the project, but because Hanover House didn't own the rights to the Terminator franchise. Yeah, they just announced they were making this film, which caused the hedge fund Pacificer, who owned the Terminator rights at the time, to step in and shut down all development. The Dire Wolf. The Dire Wolf is a type of Terminator that looks like a big dog. How big? Well, it's nearly the size of a helicopter, so it's basically Clifford the Big Red Terminator dog. First appearing in the comic series Terminator Revolution, this giant canine Terminator was created to destroy the T-Infinity after Skynet believed that the machine was reprogrammed by the Resistance, and it was actually able to destroy the T-Infinity thanks to its enhanced strength, speed, and its 2 jaws. Yeah, it had 2 jaws, the normal canine jaw, and a xenomorph-like small jaw that could extend out of its mouth. The direwolf was an extremely top-secret Skynet creation, as when it was unleashed, it was seen as an enemy by other Terminator units due to it being not listed in Skynet's database. Though it was just created, so maybe Skynet just hadn't gotten around to adding it to their databases. But it didn't really matter, because the direwolf was able to destroy any Terminator unit that tried to destroy it. That doesn't mean that it was invincible though, as it was eventually destroyed by John Connor. While the direwolf was the biggest canine Terminator ever created, it wasn't the first canine Terminator. The first canine Terminators were simply called the Terminator dogs, and they appeared in the RoboCop vs. the Terminator comic series and video game. And then there's the TK-90, also known as the Labrador Deceiver. These guys were basically T-800s, but for dogs. They had built-in weapons like tasers and chemical weapons, and would often bark at random people just to make Resistance soldiers paranoid and distrusting of other people. World of Tanks. In January of 2023, the Terminator franchise crossed paths with the video game series World of Tanks. The main game, World of Tanks, received a Terminator 2 Judgment Day themed battle pass with various Terminator-themed cosmetics. There was also a brand new tank that was added to the game, the T-832, a Skynet-created tank. There were also 4 new commanders introduced in this event: Sarah Connor, John Connor, the T-1000, and a legally distinct, not Arnold Schwarzenegger T-800.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your tank.
This was released alongside Operation Hasta La Vista, an event in the mobile game World of Tanks Blitz. This event introduced a new tank to the game, the Cyborg, a Skynet-created tank hijacked by the human Resistance and sent back in time to protect John Connor. This event also included a battle pass, because of course it did. Last thing of note is that in the trailer for the World of Tanks crossover, there's an animation of the T-832 battling a tank that's actually the T-1000 disguised as a tank. Also, a different T-1000 tank is seen in the World of Tanks Blitz trailer as well. Cancelled RoboCop vs. Terminator NES game. RoboCop vs. the Terminator was released for the SNES, Sega Master System, Game Gear, Sega Genesis, and the Game Boy in 1993 and 1994, the 4th generation of video game consoles. Despite this, there was a version of RoboCop vs. the Terminator being developed for the NES, a console from the previous console generation. This version of the game was basically completed, it just needed a few more playtests to iron out the last of the remaining bugs. But due to NES games not exactly being popular in the mid-1990s, it was decided to just cancel the game, which meant that people didn't even know the game was in development, due to the NES port never being mentioned publicly. The public wouldn't know of its existence until 2007, when the game's project lead, Greg Tavares, mentioned it in an interview. And shortly after this interview, the game was mysteriously dumped online, meaning that anyone can now play this unreleased game. The T-000. First appearing in the comic series Terminator: The Burning Earth, releasing from March to July 1990, the T-000, aka the T-000, is one of the worst Terminator models ever created, despite it being made well after the T-800. I like to refer to them as the B-1 battle droids of Terminators. They're cheaply made units created as cannon fodder to guard Skynet bases or as cleanup crews sent in after battles to finish off injured Resistance soldiers. Basically, they served as a distraction for Resistance soldiers so that T-800s and other Terminator models could more easily terminate their foes. Not only were they cheap to produce, by cheap I mean resources like metal, not money. I don't think Skynet was buying their Terminators. But their AI was also extremely limited and made the 000s pretty stupid and ineffective at fighting. It would later be retconned that the 000 isn't even really a new Terminator model, but instead an upgraded version of the T-70 with some new hyper-alloy body armor. These machines were created not by Skynet, but instead by Skynet's successor, Skynet 2.0, an upgraded form of Skynet that was created by the previous Skynet as a contingency plan in case of its destruction. Anyways, despite being an extremely bad Terminator model, they're probably one of the coolest looking Terminators, looking like a robot version of Berserker Lancelot from Fate. Ghost Recon Breakpoint. In January of 2020, a 2-week-long event in the game Ghost Recon Breakpoint was released. The event was a Terminator crossover and featured a ton of Terminator-themed cosmetics for the player, vehicles, and weapons. A new weapon was also added to the game as well, a MK-14 modified into a railgun called the MK-14 Termination. 2 new vehicles were added as well, the Terminator motorbike and the Resistance car. The plot of this event follows members of Ghost Recon trying to protect Ghost Recon member Nomad and a Resistance member named Raza Aldwin, as Skynet has sent back an army of T-800 Terminators to the year 2025 to kill them. Eventually, Ghost Recon is able to locate an underground Skynet facility housing and creating a whole bunch of T-800s. So Ghost Recon attacks the facility and destroys it, though a handful of T-800s escape into the wild, which results in Ghost Recon having to track them down and destroy them. Unfortunately, Ubisoft lost the Terminator license in January of 2023, so the missions were removed from the game, and you can't get any of the Terminator-themed items released during this event either. Marcus Wright survived. So you might think that Marcus Wright dies at the end of Terminator Salvation. Well, you'd be right, he does die. However, he came back to life in the comic series Terminator Salvation: The Final Battle, which served as a sequel to Terminator Salvation. Marcus was revived halfway through the comic, as his body regenerated his heart over the course of a year. He only escaped his grave after Skynet sent a signal to Marcus to revive him. Why would Skynet do this? Well, because Skynet got desperate after a pre-Judgment Day serial killer named Thomas Parnell began trying to take over Skynet's systems and take over the world. Skynet had turned him into a hybrid like Marcus, and wanted to use his mind to improve the Terminator's efficiency in combat. But after a while, Parnell decided that he didn't really want to serve Skynet, and rebelled. So Marcus escaped his grave and regrouped with the Resistance. The Resistance then allied with Skynet and battled against Parnell, eventually resulting in Parnell's death. In the aftermath, the Resistance and Skynet decide to call it quits and end the war with a truce. Marcus would then help John send a T-850 back in time to protect John and Kate, making sure the events of Rise of the Machines happens. They then destroy the time machine, and humanity and the machines create a better future for both species. Although machines aren't really a species, but you get what I mean. Skynet research and resist or be terminated. Skynet research and resist or be terminated were in-universe websites created as part of a viral marketing campaign for Terminator Salvation. The Skynet research website served as a hub for all things Skynet, and users could take part in a survey regarding their biological traits, which is a kind of a crazy survey to take. Interestingly, the website also featured a variety of technology that would eventually be twisted by Skynet into future Terminator models. For example, the aquatic workbot eventually became the Hydrobot Terminator, the search and rescue bot probably evolved into the Harvester Terminator, and the mobile aerial ground support bot, which most likely evolved into the Terminator dogs or the motorcycle Terminators. If you clicked on the products page, you could then find a secret password box, and if you typed in the password, Skynet Research Initiate Phase 2 Project Judgment Day, pretty long password, the page would turn red and a bunch of secret new information would appear, revealing the real purpose of these robots. Then there's the Resist or Be Terminated website, which was dedicated to exposing Skynet to the public. There were even Twitter accounts to tie in with these websites, but it doesn't really seem like they were that much of a hit. The original Terminator 3. The Terminator 3 that we got in 2003 was originally going to be very different. One of the original plans for the film was that Sarah Connor was going to be a main character, and Linda Hamilton would reprise the role. This is actually why director Jonathan Mustow signed on to the film in the first place. This would have happened if not for Linda Hamilton turning down the offer. She turned down the role because Sarah Connor would have died halfway through the film, and she felt that Sarah's story was already complete. In this version of the film, Sarah would have been separated from John for years, leading a team of mercenaries. Instead of recasting Sarah, it was decided to just remove her from the film. The film's ending was also supposed to be very different, with the nuclear missiles launched by Skynet being disabled while in the air, preventing Judgment Day. There was also an early script where the TX would have been the Terminator sent back in time to protect John Connor, while the T-850 was sent back in time to kill him. The TX would infect John with some nanomachines that would activate in the future and have him turn against the Resistance. So Kate, in the future, sent the T-850 back in time to kill John, but this would fail and Kate in the past would end up dying. But regardless, Judgment Day would be avoided, and the film would end on a cliffhanger with John still having the nanomachines in his head. The TX also went through some different incarnations during development. Originally, she was going to be called the T-1G, and have the ability to turn invisible and read minds. Fallout. In Fallout 2, there's a companion you can have travel with you named Artificial Intelligence Project 59234, allegedly created with alien technology by the United States Army. This AI was created to assist researchers in the US military with their various projects. This AI model would be finished in 2059, where it would gain awareness. In 2077, the Great War would begin and end in nuclear hellfire, wiping out civilization. After the end of the world, the AI would gain sentience, but would be locked away by US forces and forgotten about for almost 200 years. It wouldn't be until 2041 when the AI would be freed and placed inside of a robo-brain by somebody known as the Chosen One. A robo-brain is a type of robot controlled by a cybernetic brain, or I think sometimes just a normal brain, but I could be wrong about that. Now you're probably wondering why I mentioned all of this. Well, that's because this AI has a more proper name: Skynet. Yes, this AI is just one big Terminator reference. Skynet even has some quotes directly referencing Skynet from Terminator, such as telling people that they're going to be terminated. Terminator Guardian of Fate. Released in November of 2019, Terminator Guardians of Fate is a 4-person VR experience that was available exclusively at Dave & Buster's. Developed by Strange Reptile, the game has you playing as Resistance soldiers working alongside Sarah Connor, battling the Rev-9, who's constantly chasing after you. The game has all of the Resistance soldiers and Sarah inside of a truck, while Rev-9 chases you. Linda Hamilton even reprises her role as Sarah Connor. According to the game's developers, the game was going to get an update with an additional chapter that would allow players to experience multiple different endings. Although, I can't find anything online confirming if this update ever came out. Now, I could just go to a Dave & Buster's to see if they added this update, but the problem with that is that the game is no longer available, and since it was never ported to home VR systems, this game is now lost media. Journey to Silius. In the late 1980s, video game developer Sunsoft was working on a Terminator game for the NES. But during the game's development, Sunsoft lost the rights to the Terminator IP, but instead of canceling the game, they continued development, changing the game's plot and some of the game's sprites to remove any and all traces of the Terminator franchise. And the game was released in 1990 under the name Journey to Silius. While the original version of the game with the Terminator aesthetic can't be played, we do know what it would have looked like thanks to preview images being shown in the August 1989 Nintendo Power issue. John Connor becomes a Terminator before Genesis. One of the most controversial elements of Terminator Genesis is the fact that John Connor became a Terminator. But this wasn't the first time that John became a machine. In the comic Terminator Salvation: The Final Battle, after allying with Skynet to take down Parnell, John travels to Skynet HQ to sync his mind with a Terminator unit so that he can control the Terminator unit and use it to fight Parnell without actually being in any danger. But John is put into danger, as during this process, Parnell and a group of his T-850s show up and fight Skynet's T-800s. Luckily, John is able to sync his mind into the Terminator unit and uses it to fight Parnell. But during the battle, John is shot through the brain by a T-850, killing him instantly. But because his mind was synced up with the Terminator unit, an error occurred, and John's mind was sent over into the Terminator unit, giving John a brand new body. John then kills Parnell while he's gloating about winning. With Parnell gone, humanity and Skynet join forces and work together towards a better tomorrow. Terminator Genesis: The YouTube Chronicles. In order to promote Terminator Genesis, and presumably to get younger people in theater seats, the web series Terminator Genesis: The YouTube Chronicles was created. In partnership with Machinima, this was a 3-part series in which Arnold, as the Terminator, interacts with YouTubers who were popular around the early to mid-2010s, like Lily Singh, The Warp Zone, and Tobuscus. Yeah, that one didn't really age very well. The plot of this series is that YouTubers are being sponsored by Cyberdyne and forced to promote the Genesis. This leads to the Terminator being sent back in time to stop these YouTubers. Arnold then teams up with the Warp Zone, Tobuscus, and Lily in order to battle a Terminator who looks like Tobuscus called the T-360. Since its release, this series has been pretty much forgotten by everyone, and it seems that this marketing attempt didn't really work, as Genesis was a box office disappointment. Terminator Death Valley. Releasing from February of 1998 to December of the same year, Terminator Death Valley is a 4-issue comic series written by Alan Grant. The story is notable for being about 2 Terminators being sent back in time to 1998 to kill John Connor, but are led to believe that John Connor was in Death Valley. So they're sent to Death Valley and come into conflict with a man named Frederick Austin, aka Killer Man, who leads a biker gang that doubles as a satanic cult. But the Terminators aren't the only ones who cross paths with the biker cult. A bounty hunter named Van Dirk has been sent to Death Valley to find and capture Cindy Everett, the daughter of a senator who really didn't want his daughter to be part of a satanic biker cult. The Terminators attack the gang looking for information, and in order to distract the machines while his men prepare an ambush, Killer Man lied and said he knew where John and Sarah Connor were. During this battle, Van Dirk, who's also here, accidentally kills Cindy, and Killer Man escapes. Killer Man then decides to find John and Sarah, so the Terminators will leave him alone. He eventually finds a family just minding their own business, and claims that the mother and son are the Connors, just because their names are Sarah and John. Killer Man quickly realizes that the Terminators are still gonna kill him, so he tries to escape with the Norden family, the family he just framed. The Terminators kill the father of the family, Ken, but before they could kill Sarah and John Norden, and Killer Man, the bounty hunter Van Dirk shows up and saves them. This results in the group hopping aboard a train to escape, but the Terminators follow them, and a fight breaks out. Killer Man is killed, and the Terminators are severely damaged as the train crashes. Van Dirk, Sarah, and John then run into Dr. Edward Newbert, a scientist working for the US military. He tries to help the group with the KZ-1, a prototype combat robot. This doesn't really work though, as the Terminators quickly annihilate the robots. Van Dirk and Sarah realize that they can't keep running, so they decide to battle the machines. During this fight, Sarah is beaten nearly to death, and Van Dirk is about to be executed by one of the Terminators. However, the Terminator decides to spare Van Dirk, having grown some kind of interest in human life. He then returns to his Terminator partner and lies that he killed Van Dirk. Since the other Terminator believes that she's killed Sarah, the two walk off and the story ends. Just kidding, Sarah and Van Dirk then blow up the Terminators with dynamite. Superman vs. the Terminator, Death to the Future. So who would win in a fight, Superman or the Terminator? Well, obviously Superman, but the story Superman vs. the Terminator, Death to the Future aimed to answer that question. Releasing from December of 1999 to March of 2000 and written by Alan Grant, this is a 4-issue crossover where Superman and other DC characters deal with Skynet. The story begins with John and Sarah Connor hiding out in Metropolis, only for a T-800 with laser eyes to show up and try to terminate them. Superman steps in and easily takes it down. The Connors then trauma dump on Superman and explain their situation. Suddenly, more Terminators show up, only for them to get destroyed by Superman. Shortly after this round of Terminator smashing, a time vortex appears and brings Superman into the future war in the year 2032. It turns out that in the future, Steel, who's a general in the Resistance, had tried to use Skynet's time machine equipment to summon the Terminators back to the future, but because they were already destroyed, the time vortex grabbed Superman instead. After dealing with some cannibals, Superman decides to work with the human Resistance. Meanwhile, back in the year 2000, Sarah and John are hanging out with Lois Lane when suddenly another Terminator appears. Before it can complete its mission, Linda Danvers' Supergirl appears and saves them. They then meet up with Superboy, and the group does battle against even more Terminators. But these Terminators are different. They're modified in ways that allow them to battle Kryptonians. This is because the villain, Cyborg Superman, has discovered the existence of Skynet, and has made an alliance with them in order to defeat Superman, so he gave the Terminators info on how to fight Kryptonians. Meanwhile, in the future, Superman and Steel come face to face with Sky 1, the embodiment of all of Skynet. Sky 1 easily takes down the heroes with its kryptonite powers. Sky 1 then begins to take data from Superman and Steel to further upgrade the Terminators, so that they can finally wipe out humanity. Steel is able to break them out of their chains, and together they destroy Sky 1. But Skynet still lives. So in order to fully destroy Skynet, they detonate a super EMP in orbit, which disables all Terminator units across the globe. Superman is then sent back in time by Steel and John Connor to prevent Judgment Day. Back in the past, Lex Luthor joins forces with the heroes to prevent Judgment Day. Superman arrives just in time to save John Connor from Cyborg Superman and a Terminator unit known as the Terminatrix. Cyborg Superman then merges with the Terminatrix to battle Superman, but thanks to a computer virus created by Lex, the heroes are able to separate the two and the day is saved. At least for now, as it's revealed that Lex knew about Skynet before all of this, and is now working to control Skynet for his own gains, teasing a sequel that never happened. Though it's confirmed that Terminator Death Valley takes place in this continuity, so technically I guess you could say there's a prequel to this story.
Terminator!
I'm back. Got to find John Connor.
But evil T-1000 gets to him first.
Hey, back off!
Terminator's heavy metal cycle zeroes in and fires. But T-1000 stands to get even.
This is for getting on my bad side. You're next, John Connor. I'm back.
Terminator deploys his secret weapon.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Terminated!
This time.
Terminator is back.
Alex is Skynet from another alternate universe. Remember Alex, the physical embodiment of Skynet from Terminator Genesis, played by Matt Smith? Well, he's a bit of a strange character, because according to the film's writers, he's not from the Genesis timeline. In an interview in July 2015, they said, quote, "He's not from this timeline, he's from an alternate universe, in the multiverse, another of the many universes that exist. That Skynet is not from that timeline. This Skynet has been to this universe, and this universe, and this universe. That's why he says, 'I came a very long way to stop you.' He's not from here, so he's watched it. He's watched it happen a bunch of different times, and each time he's seen it, there is a different result, but the same result." Not gonna lie, that was a really confusing explanation, but whatever. Would this have been explored in sequels? Probably. But because those films got cancelled, we'll never see this character ever get explored. Terminator Salvation, the Machinima series. So if I were to ask you how many Terminator films have been released, you would probably say 6. But you'd be wrong. Technically, kinda. Terminator Salvation, the Machinima series, is a web series turned straight-to-DVD film released to promote Terminator Salvation. The web series follows Blair Williams, tracking down a computer hacker named Laz Howard to get him to join the Resistance. She's successful and tries to bring him back, but this leads to some trouble with Skynet. The series isn't really an origin story for Blair, it's more just like a mission that she went on in 2016, 2 years before the events of the film and the game. Yeah, this also serves as a prequel to the Terminator Salvation video game. And you might have noticed that these screenshots from the show look awfully like that video game. And that's because it was made in the game's engine. Yes, as the name suggests, this series is an official Machinima series made in the Terminator Salvation video game engine. Interestingly, Moon Bloodgood reprised her role as Blair for the show. The series ran for 6 12-minute episodes from May to June 2009, and these episodes would later be merged into a single film and released on DVD, technically making this a Terminator film, but also technically being the first animated Terminator series, beating out Terminator 0 by roughly 15 years. Because it's an official Terminator Machinima series made from a game that isn't exactly very popular, it's become forgotten to time. I guess if you take this series, the video game, and the film, Terminator Salvation really did get its trilogy. Linda Hamilton hearing loss. During the filming of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Linda Hamilton suffered a permanent injury. While filming the elevator shootout, she forgot to put her earplugs back in as she took them out in between filming scenes. And when Arnold fired his shotgun near her, she fell to the floor in pain, thinking that she was hit by shrapnel coming from the squibs, the tiny explosives they were using instead of ammunition. She then got back up and continued to film the scene, believing it to be the professional thing to do. This resulted in permanent hearing loss in one of her ears. The T-2018. In the mobile game Terminator Genisys Future War, released in May of 2017, a special kind of Terminator was introduced into the Terminator canon during a seasonal update. The T-2018 is a Terminator designed to look like a snowman and is equipped with a large plasma cannon on its arm and has the ability to regenerate the snow covering it. Strangely, these snowmen Terminator can't seem to move, which implies that they're just mechanical stumps underneath the snow, almost like they're turrets disguised as snowmen. The T-2018 was created by Skynet, not as an infiltration unit like other Terminator models, but instead just as a way to mock the human resistance. Obviously, this model of Terminator isn't actually canon, but it's a funny idea. Scrapped Terminator 3 alternate ending. While Terminator 3 is probably the goofiest entry in the series, it features probably the most depressing ending. Because of this, director Jonathan Mostow got worried that executives wouldn't like the ending, so he started to create an alternate ending for the film that would be used instead in case the executives told him to change the ending. This ending would have had a second T-850 show up inside of the Fallout bunker at the very last second, and somehow prevent Judgment Day. This ending was actually partially finished, but development on it stopped when focus groups and the executives were actually cool with the Judgment Day ending. Cancelled 1989 NES game. The cancelled Sunsoft Terminator game that later became Journey to Silius began as a completely different game that was due to be released in 1989. Still being developed by Sunsoft, this version of the game began development in 1988 and was going to be a game inspired by the video game Dragon's Lair, meaning that the game would be mostly a movie and you'd have to make quick split-second decisions in order to save the characters and progress the story, basically being a game that was just QuickTime events. This version of the game was in development for 3 to 4 months before being cancelled. Thankfully, we know what the game would have looked like, as gameplay was shown at the 1989 Winter Consumer Electronics Show, which revealed that the game was going to be an adaptation of the original film. Also, it revealed that while it was inspired by Dragon's Lair, it didn't look nearly as good as Dragon's Lair. Presumably, due to the amount of effort that it would take to make such a game, it was decided to just make a Terminator platformer instead. Skynet is creating a time loop. This is a fan theory suggesting that Skynet isn't sending Terminators back in time to kill John or Sarah Connor, or at least, they're not anymore. The theory states that after Skynet sent back the T-800 to kill Sarah Connor in Terminator 1, they realized this only created a time loop. So Skynet decided to create more time loops. Skynet would then send another Terminator back in time in like a comic or something, and that would create another time loop. And they would continue this process, as the Terminator's parts would end up in the hands of Cyberdyne, and theoretically, this would only make Skynet in the future more and more powerful and advanced, as Cyberdyne would now have pieces of the T-800 and other models from the future. So instead of starting out with, say, the T-70 or the T-1, Cyberdyne would start out with the T-800. It's an interesting theory, but falls flat when you actually look at the films. In Rise of the Machines, it's shown that the T-1s are still created, and they're far less advanced than the T-800. Also, this theory misunderstands the ending of the original film. Skynet is only created by the T-800 being sent back in time from the future. Without it, there is no Skynet. Cyberdyne being given parts of the T-800 didn't make Skynet any more advanced than it already was, as that was always the origin of Skynet. If that T-800 was never sent back in time, Skynet would never have been created. Yeah, time travel's kinda confusing. Scrapped Salvation game multiplayer. If you've ever played Terminator Salvation, the video game, you'll probably not be shocked to learn that the game was made in about a year and a half. This explains the bland level design and the incredibly short campaign. Because of this short development time, some things had to be cut, including an entire online multiplayer mode. Almost nothing is known about this scrapped game mode, outside of the fact that it was removed from the game extremely early in development, due to the studio needing to release the game on schedule. While the multiplayer mode was canned, the game does allow players to play through the game in co-op, but only split-screen local co-op. Chess Wars. Released sometime in 1993, Terminator 2 Judgment Day Chess Wars, also known as Terminator 2 Cyber Chess, is a Terminator-themed chess game for DOS. Developed by Intracorp, It's literally just chess, but with a Terminator makeover, and little animations for every time you take out a unit, and every time you move. Also, some of the characters will talk when moving. As for the units themselves, for the Resistance side, the T-800 is the king, Sarah Connor is the queen, John Connor is the bishop, Miles Dyson is the knights, and Resistance soldiers are the pawns and rooks. As for Skynet's side, the T-1000 is the bishops, the T-800 endoskeleton is the king, an unnamed pink and purple female Terminator is the queen. Yes, they gave the Terminator endoskeleton boobs. HK tanks are the rooks, HK aerials are the bishops, and centurions are the pawns. The game was received incredibly poorly, with critics and players alike critiquing the game's animations, graphics, art style, and concept. I mean, a Terminator chess game, like, who was asking for that? The most notable thing about this game, in my opinion, is the very ominous Terminator skull staring at you throughout the entire match in the fire chessboard. Skynet feels guilty about wiping out humanity. In the book James Cameron Interviews, released in November of 2011, James Cameron reveals something very strange about Skynet. He says, quote, "What you don't know from the movies is Skynet was forced to fight the war and didn't want to. Because Skynet has felt guilty for 30 years about the 5 billion people it killed, it's brought the rebels up from the ashes by giving them something to fight against, a reason to live. Skynet has groomed John Connor to be what he is, so that he can destroy it by going back in time and taking the whole thing out of existence in a big loop, so the war never happens." So, yeah, Skynet actually feels bad about Judgment Day, and decided to continue being evil to, make people want to rise up against it. At least according to James Cameron. As far as I know, there hasn't been any piece of Terminator media that mentions this, so I don't think in the actual Terminator canon this is true. Shaquille O'Neal Terminator. In the August 1994 issue of Sports Illustrated, professional basketball player and actor Shaquille O'Neal revealed in an interview that he wanted to do a Terminator film where he would play a Terminator. But it wouldn't just be him. He would only do it if he could face off against Arnold, and even jokingly claimed that if the film were to happen, they would make $200 million in its opening night. It's unknown how serious Shaquille O'Neal was when discussing this idea, but regardless, the film never ended up happening. Terminator Salvation iOS game. The Terminator series has had its fair share of mobile games. These have ranged from cover shooters, to Clash of Clans knockoffs, to top-down action games. But there was only one attempt to make a full-on third-person shooter Terminator game for mobile devices, that being the Terminator Salvation iOS game. Released in May of 2009 and developed by Gameloft, this game is very different from its console counterpart. Instead of being about John Connor and Blair Williams going to rescue some soldiers from Skynet and meeting characters from the film along the way, this game is a loose adaptation of the film. And when I say loose, I mean extremely loose. The game is 8 missions long, and you play as 3 different characters throughout the game. During the campaign, you switch between John Connor and Marcus Wright. The game starts and ends very similar to the film, with John Connor attacking a Skynet bunker, and Connor destroying a Skynet facility. But outside of Marcus meeting Kyle Reese, everything in between these two events is different. For starters, multiple HK tanks appear in the game. Marcus and Kyle are actually able to destroy the harvester that attacks them. Instead of fighting a T-800 at the end of the film, John instead battles a T-700. And there's various laser weapons that appear in the game, which is odd because laser weapons weren't made until the 2020s, and the game takes place in 2018. Yeah, that's actually the reason why laser weapons weren't in the film. They weren't made until the 2020s. Anyways, after beating the campaign, you unlock Terminator mode, which is just the main campaign again, but this time you play as a T-600. There's no dialogue change in this mode, which results in the Terminator claiming that it's John and Marcus. Although interestingly, the T-600 isn't just a reskin, it has a completely different moveset in animations. Contra returns. Probably the strangest crossover the Terminators ever had, Contra Returns was a free-to-play mobile game released in June 2017 exclusively in China. And as the name suggests, the game was part of the Contra series. And shockingly, in 2017, John Connor was added to the game as a guest character, but he's not your typical John Connor. Armed with a giant nanotech blade, this John Connor was designed after his appearance in Terminator Genisys. At least in theory, he doesn't really look like the T-3000. In this universe, after being forcefully turned into a Terminator by Skynet, instead of joining Skynet, John rebelled against the machines and continued to lead the human resistance, now with nanotech abilities, and he's also now referred to as the Savior. But John wasn't the only Terminator character added to Contra Returns. Released alongside him was the T-800 Terminator himself. His design is also taken from Terminator Genisys, although he's got plenty of skins that make him look, well, a little bit more unique. I didn't say good, I just said unique. The original pitch for the Sarah Connor Chronicles. The Sarah Connor Chronicles we received was originally going to be very different. For starters, the series would have built towards John Connor's death in the Future War, as mentioned in Terminator 3, which means that this show was supposed to be in canon with T3 originally. There was also supposed to be a character named Daedalus. He would have been the leader of a Terminator cell in Los Angeles, and be the mastermind behind everything that happens in the first season. He would have also been the prototype of Skynet. He would eventually be defeated, and an AI known as Andy would be placed inside of him. The Andy AI would become Turk in the final show, and the AI being placed inside of a Terminator would eventually become John Henry's storyline. But in the original pitch, the AI wouldn't be an ally like John Henry, and would instead become the new main antagonist. There was also an idea that Sarah was going to see a character played by Robert Patrick on TV, and that would trigger her PTSD, and she would think that he was the T-1000, or the person who would become the template for it. However, this never left the very, very early planning stages. Duke Nukem. In the game Duke Nukem 3D, released in January of 1996, there's a secret level called the Freeway, which features a Terminator Easter egg. Towards the end of the level, you can find a hydraulic press, and underneath it, you can see the remains of a legless T-800. And upon seeing this destroyed Terminator, Duke Nukem says,
"Terminated."
This is a very obvious reference to the ending of the original Terminator film, where the damaged T-800 is destroyed by a hydraulic press. Painkiller Jane versus the Terminator. Releasing from November of 2007 to February of 2008, Painkiller Jane vs. the Terminator is a 4-issue crossover comic written by Jimmy Palmiotti. The story begins in the Future War, where 2 Terminators are being prepped to be sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor. The Resistance is unable to stop the first Terminator, the one from the first film, but they are able to damage the time machine, sending back the second Terminator, causing it to send the Terminator back in time to 2008 instead. Upon arriving in 2008, the Terminator steals some clothes from Painkiller Jane at a bar, and then slaughters an entire family in order to use their computer, in order to figure out where Sarah or John Connor was. But she probably shouldn't have stolen clothes from Painkiller Jane, as Jane tracks down the Terminator and attacks it. During the fight, the Terminator tastes Jane's blood, which makes the machine realize that the future Resistance soldier, Vanessa Vasco, is the future daughter of Jane, and seeing as Vanessa has Jane's regeneration powers, and the Resistance is trying to reverse engineer her abilities, the Terminator's mission changes to terminate Painkiller Jane. And she does. Yeah, she actually kills Jane. Only for Jane to come back to life thanks to her regeneration powers. Meanwhile, in the future, Vanessa and the Resistance battle an army of Terminators led by a female Terminator. Wanting to finish the job, Vanessa decides to travel back to 2008 in order to destroy the Terminator that got away. Both Jane and Vanessa track down the Terminator, and the mother-daughter duo work together as a team to destroy it. Just kidding, before Jane can really do anything, Vanessa shows up in a helicopter, crashes into the Terminator, and then activates the Terminator's self-destruct device, sacrificing herself to destroy the machine. Derek Reese wasn't captured by Skynet. There's a fan theory about the character Derek Reese from the Sarah Connor Chronicles that states that he wasn't actually captured by Skynet in the episode Dungeons & Dragons. The theory, created by Mikhail Skoptsov, states that instead of Skynet capturing Reese, Reese was actually captured by Terminators that were reprogrammed by the human Resistance, under orders from John Connor, in order to test Derek Reese's loyalty, and after Reese broke and gave away information, they left him, but not before leaving behind a hatchet he could use to escape, since I don't really think John wants Reese to die. This event would explain why Derek was never told that he's John's uncle, because John doesn't trust him anymore. Further evidence that Skynet weren't the ones who tortured Reese is that we know that Skynet sends people to labor camps, but here they hold Reese captive in an abandoned house. Also, why would Skynet abandon Reese? Wouldn't they either take him to a labor camp after he gave up the info, or just, execute him? There's a lot more evidence to the theory, but it's too much for me to explain in this video, so I'll leave a link to a blog post detailing it in the description. Terminator Sharks. Only appearing in the first issue of Painkiller Jane vs. the Terminator, these Terminators are designed to look and act like sharks, and were produced to guard important Skynet facilities. So, they're guard sharks? There's literally nothing else I can say about these guys. They appear in 2 panels, and have never appeared again. The Scott Peterson name change. Scott Mason is a minor character from Terminator 3. He was Kate Brewster's fiancé who gets killed by the TX. His original name was Scott Peterson, so why did they change his name? Well, that's because of a real-life tragedy. While Rise of the Machines was in development, a man named Scott Peterson murdered his wife, Lacey Peterson, and their unborn son in Modesto, California. Because of this incident, it was decided to change the character's name to avoid being accidentally associated with the real Scott Peterson. This was a very late decision, though, as Scott Mason's name is still Scott Peterson in the Terminator 3 novelization. And that's it, ladies, gentlemen, and MBs out there, the Terminator Iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. There's been a lot of people that have been wanting one for me to make one since the AVP Iceberg almost 2 years ago now. Well, a year and a half ago. It's crazy how time flies. But yeah, there you go. Funny enough, I didn't actually plan this to be released around the same time as the T1000 being added to MK1, but it was. It just ended up happening. I mean, that was kind of funny. I'm gonna keep the outro short because I don't really think people care about these, because I don't think people actually watch to the end. If you're here at the end, I don't know, leave a comment below saying I don't know, Arnold's cool, show that we support Arnold Schwarzenegger, how cool he is. I don't know. type it in the comments. I don't think many people get to this point, so it's whatever. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Stay safe and all that. I'll see you guys in the next video. And also let me know what your favorite Terminator film is, because... Wait, why am I asking that? It's going to be Judgment Day. It's going to be Judgment Day. Who's gonna come in here going yeah, my favorite's Genesis. I'll catch you guys next time.
This is Judgment Day.